Well, welcome everybody to the January meeting of the Early Television Foundation Society. Glad to see you all. Going to just say a couple of things about what's happened in the last month, which is really not a lot. Things have continued to go well at the museum. I'm getting more and more hopeful about being able to plan for a convention this coming fall. We'll play it by ear and see how things go, but I think that's a possibility, and it would really be nice to do that if it's safe. We just passed 120 members for 2021, and that's ahead of where we were last year. Usually we get people dribble in during the year. We had a total of, I think, 186 last year by the end of the year. So if you haven't joined yet or renewed your membership, please do that. It's $35, and you can do it on the side panel, left side panel of any page of our website, the box that says support the museum. I'm going to start the presentation tonight with, as we're going to do each month, and talking about an interesting item at the museum. And this month, we're going to talk about our CBS Field-Sequential Varicolor camera. Larry, are you set up so we can see your video?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Hey, this is fancy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that looks great. Let me tell you, I'll just go over, I know most of you already know this story, but I'm going to spend a couple of minutes going over a brief history of the CBS color system. The first color system was actually, that we know of, was done by John Logie Baird back in 1928. And it was also a field sequential system and used a mechanical scanning disc too. And before World War II, really about the same time as iconoscope cameras were being developed, CBS and RCA and others experimented with color, again, field sequential. And then after the war, CBS worked through the war on their system, perfecting their system, and made a real pitch to the FCC to say, hey, let's adopt a color system before black and white has many sets sold. And they did this because their system wasn't compatible with black and white television. Finally, in 1950, the FCC did a comparison of where RCA was with their compatible system and CBS's system, and it was like night and day. The CBS system produced really, really good pictures. The RCA system was early in its development and didn't produce very good pictures. So the FCC authorized the CBS to implement their system. Larry, just let's go to number one, so that make sure all of you know how the receivers in field sequential systems work. They have a rotating color wheel that goes in front of the camera, in front of the screen. There's a similar one in front of the camera, and they're synchronized. So the three primary colors are transmitted one sequentially, and thus the name field sequential. The CBS system was. Let's pan over to the gray monitor, Larry, so we can show what one of the pieces of equipment we have for viewing field sequential color, and you can see the wheel inside, and it has a magnifier in it. That's a 10-inch CRT. We got that long before we got the camera. One of the conditions of the CBS Field-Sequential system that the FCC made was that they had to find companies to manufacture their sets. They were unsuccessful because RCA was making great progress at that time, and people could see the writing on the wall that it was going to be, that eventually RCA was most likely going to have a compatible system that worked. And so CBS was unable to get any support from manufacturers for making their sets. A few were made, and there are a few for surviving sets around. And then the Korean War came along, and the government declared that the motors used in the Field-Sequential sets for the wheels were needed for the manufacturing capacity for motors were needed for the war effort. And that's just what CBS needed. In fact, there's some speculation that CBS might have pushed that along. And that allowed them to bow out of their system. Larry, pan over to the RCA prototype set. This is a 1952 set from RCA that Nick Williams has loaned to the museum, and we restored it a few years ago. It didn't use the system that they ended up with, but it was sort of
Hi, Chuck Azar here, just got here.
An interim step along the way to the set that was finally adopted as the system is finally adopted by the country as the NTSC color system. Okay, let's go back to the camera now. In 2015, an anonymous source donated this camera to the museum, or just the camera head. Now inside it, mounted horizontally, is a 5820 image orthicon tube. And then right behind the lens is a small color wheel. So let's go to that. That's number, what is that? There you go. The colored drum that is behind the lens. And inside that drum was a mirror that directed the image through the lens to the face of the image orthicon tube. Now, as I say, all we had was the camera head, and we made the decision to try to get it going. We had very good documentation from CBS on what they used, which of course was all vacuum tube, and that didn't seem like a practical approach. So what we decided to do, let's go back to the camera again, Larry, to number 3. We had to make a makeshift mount for the camera, and you can see it on the bottom, and also a cable, because it's not a standard, even though the shell looks like the ones used on RCA cameras, it's not, it's different. So we had to make a connector, and we used an old cable that we had that had the number of leads in it that we need. I should say inside, go back to the camera head again. Inside the camera head, all there is some voltage dividers, a video preamp, and a high voltage power supply that generates, I think, 1500 volts for the, that's fine. You can go down there now. A high voltage power supply that was used to drive the image orthicon. We were able to get all that working, and made the decision to use vacuum tubes for the sweep circuits because of it was a much easier way. Yeah, stay down on that unit at the bottom, Larry. It was easier to match the tubes to the deflection yoke in the image orthicon. So we used the vacuum tube circuits using CBS documentations to build all the deflection circuitry, and then go up to the next one. We built a CCU, and it contains the the various pots for setting the voltages in the image orthicon for the image orthicon, and also has in it the circuitry for driving the motor and synchronizing it. And you can see that's all solid state. Now we needed a sync generator for this, and fortunately, a couple of years earlier, I built a color bar generator for the Field-Sequential system. That was the first time we were able to get pictures on the Field-Sequential sets, and I used it as the sync generator. Then I also built another unit, which is the one above it, which is a video processor, and in it are another video preamplifier, and again, it's all solid state, and a gamma corrector, and various circuitry for switching the three colors to go into the video feed, and also circuitry for inserting blanking and sync. Now we had to go, and so going up to the next thing up above it, we had for a waveform monitor, we used a Tektronix unit we had around, and had to modify it for the 405 line system, which has a different, quite a bit higher line rate and somewhat lower frame rate. So we had to modify it, and that's what we used for setting it up. Now, and when we have our conventions, we've had them in the past, we've demonstrated this, and it produces a decent picture. I think if we took the time, there's the lights we put for it, and then we have a color bar pattern that we had printed for setup purposes, and then we had people standing in front of it, and we could televise it. I think if we ever spent the time setting up and having somebody who really knew how to set up an image orthicon, we could get way better pictures than we have. But it's just sort of thrilling to see any kind of pictures out of something this old. So that's my little description. Does anybody have any questions?
Steve, I was wondering about the weird, wild shape of the color disc. Instead of a pie shaped, it's all those angles and so on. I don't understand why.
On the color wheel?
On the wheel.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's not big enough. The segment is not big enough to completely cover the CRT. And so it's designed so that as it moves down the CRT, starting in the scanning lines on the top, the filter stays over the face of the tube at the point where the scanning lines are, if I'm making any sense. So that's why it's made that, and that allows them to make the wheel substantially smaller.
Steve,
Yeah.
I've got a question that has bothered me for a while. In a bunch of literature that I found, which is Dumont literature, they show in 1949, I think it is, a field-sequential color system, which they called industrial color system, uses a wheel, but it's 525 lines, 30 frames. And I'm wondering, other than bandwidth, why CBS didn't try to do that. It seems like it would work.
I think the bandwidth is the reason. We have a Dumont monitor for that standard, and it's if I remember correctly, it requires 18 megahertz of bandwidth to get decent resolution. So that's why CBS, used what they did.
I suppose that would do it. That's what, 3 TV channels or something.
Yeah, right. They already had a problem with their incompatibility, and that's the last thing they had.
I was just thinking at 525 lines, 30 frames, it ought to at least be able to be picked up on a black and white TV, but maybe not. Yeah.
Right.
Steve?
Yeah.
One thing I was wondering about is, I should have shaved. In thinking about it, wasn't the CBS system a 72 frame per second, 144 field system?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So was it indeed a faster frame rate?
Well, it's actually a faster frame rate, but it's slower per color. The field rate is 24 versus 30.
Okay, for the color, it was 24
Yeah.
frames
Yeah.
instead of 72.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I understand what you're saying now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Well, when we open up the museum for our convention, I hope you all will come and we'll fire it up and you can see yourselves on Field-Sequential TV. You know, at the World's Fair, RCA gave out cards that say you could go and be televised in 1939 and on a pavilion there, and they gave out cards saying you have been televised by the RCA television system. Well, we made replica cards that say you've been televised by Field-Sequential Color that we give out to people. So see you next convention.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
My question was, what didn't CBS originally plan to do this color broadcasting up in UHF somewhere to use the full bandwidth? And then
yeah, that was one of their suggestions. Now, what they actually did broadcast, they broadcast on, as I understand it, 10 stations around the country, including the one in Columbus. That monitor we have came from Atlanta. But I remember at one point in the development, they did talk about using UHF channels.
Okay, thanks.
There used to be a guy in Connecticut named Al Denson who had something called Denson Electronics. And back when I was in high school, I used to go visit him a few times. And he had a bunch of CBS color stuff in his warehouse. And I've always wondered what happened to it. Probably in a landfill, unfortunately, but it was
probably
pretty bizarre stuff, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be nice to find a bunch of that stuff.
It really would.
Yeah. So are we going to Blake next, or are we going to
Can you hear me?
Mike?
Charles Azar is trying to talk.
I
Right.
just wanted to say I've joined. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you now too.
Okay, great. Okay, fine.
And happy birthday, Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you. Had a good birthday. I flew in Joe Stonecrabs from Miami Beach.
Happy birthday, Chuck.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday, Chuck.
Thanks.
Okay, who are we going to next?
Oh, we go to Blake next. Oh no, we were gonna. We had the question, the tech topic.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, I forgot entirely about that.
I was going to say, I was waiting.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, the tech topic was it was a little confusing. There was a question asked about was the CT100 the only set that was able to produce really accurate colors, and most of the answers at that time were related to the phosphors in the 15G and in the 21AX. But there's also the issue of the circuitry that was used in the CT100. So let's talk about both topics. So anyone that has anything to chime in, let's hear from you.
If I could be allowed to share the screen.
Also, the Kloss video projector used IMQ.
I believe you can, David. Yes.
The NTSC signal specification at the table below shows the I and Q bandwidth, where the Q channel is basically 0.5 megahertz and the I channel is much wider, 1.3 it says here, 2 dB down. This gave original NTSC greater resolution in the red colors, and the CT100 had the circuitry to do this. It had 2 separate bandpass amplifiers for color and 2 separate delay lines to get it all lined up on the screen. I don't know if any other set had that, and I think that's one of the interesting questions. Is there any other set that had separate I and Q?
The Kloss video beam projector had I and Q.
But that's just the angles. Did it have the separate bandwidth?
Yes,
because the Kloss was much newer, very recent, relatively speaking. And by then, broadcasters had gone over to equiband and weren't transmitting the wide I anymore.
I see. Are you saying that the broadcasters stopped broadcasting I at a certain time? I never knew that.
The newer equipment just didn't have the bandwidth. They left it out. So does anyone know about any other early sets that had wideband I?
You know, I don't know specifically, but you would think that as many 15G base sets as there were in 1954, that some of them must have had it, but I just don't know. We'd have to go back and research the circuits of the various sets that were made then.
Well, if they had I and Q, there would be no reason not to have the wideband amplifiers, because that was the trickiest part for the phase shift angles.
RCA in their solid state sets in the 70s for a brief time had IQ demodulation with wideband I, but I studied it very carefully when I was working at Zenith, because Zenith wanted to know whether it was worth it. And it turns out by that time, with the IF amplifier designs that were in use and the steep sound traps, the phase distortion was just terrible, and the RCA sets, although they nominally had wideband I, they actually reduced the response greatly, because otherwise the edges of red objects would all have rainbows on them. So that only lasted for maybe 1 or 2 years models, and it went back to equiband.
This is Jim Manning. I have a separate question. My understanding was that the phosphors were actually different and they were more accurate on the early sets. The later sets had brighter phosphors, but the colors weren't as good, like the red.
Yeah, that's true. There is one technical paper from RCA in the 60s that goes from the 15 GP22 up to the vanadate rare earth phosphor, and it covers the general variations that have been used. And there were about 12 different major phosphor formulations used over the years. Most of them variations in red, a couple of variations in green, and 2 different blue phosphors. And the interesting thing is that the 15GP22 used a blue phosphor that while it was close to NTSC, it was actually a little bit on the green side. And the later tubes used a sulfide blue phosphor that was more towards violet. But they wanted to use sulfide phosphors to start with, but they had a problem with copper contamination in the 15G. And the copper contamination would change the blue phosphor to green. So they had to use something different. But even with those 12 variations of the different phosphors, that only tells the rough story. There were minor changes to the formulations over the years that aren't documented. And in fact, there's one paper that says that the red phosphor that was nominally the same in the 15G and the 21AX was actually reformulated. It was the same color, but much brighter and more efficient in the 21AX. In terms of the color range that the tubes could produce, the 15G used a P1 green. And the really big change in subsequent years was to go to a sulfide green phosphor, which is not as pure green, it's more yellow. And then there were variations in the green, especially when some manufacturers added cadmium, which made the green more efficient, but still more yellow. Eventually, because of the toxic nature of cadmium, it was dropped. And the manufacturers went back to a zinc sulfide phosphor, which is yellower than NTSC, but they kind of standardized on it. And that's the color that eventually became standard for PAL and also for high definition television. And meanwhile, the NTSC cameras were still manufactured for NTSC specs. So the American TV manufacturers were doing whatever they liked to modify the signal processing to partially compensate for the yellower green phosphor. PAL got it right because they compensated in the camera instead of the receivers. And HDTV did the same thing. And then the computer industry picked up the same specifications. And for digital still cameras, they call it sRGB. So all the systems today are singing from the same sheet of music, but NTSC for many decades was kind of the Wild West.
Does anybody know the 19-inch color tube that the 19 VP that Motorola and CBS used early, what those phosphors were?
No, I don't. I suspect that they were similar to the 21AX to start with. And then in the early 60s, the all sulfide phosphors were developed, in which the red it was a zinc cadmium sulfide. And that had two effects. One is that the screen color became that olive green that you see on some of the old tubes. And also that sulfide red phosphor was nonlinear and tended to turn orange in the bright highlights. But all the other red phosphors that have been used have been pretty close to NTSC red. It was really the green phosphor that varied the worst, and the blue somewhat. In fact, while I was at Zenith, the phosphor lab decided to look at a blue phosphor that was more cyan than purple in order to balance out the beam currents somewhat. And they asked me to look at a trial tube and set up the circuits in a set to match the change. And of course, what happened, which you might not think of at first, but once you think of it, it's obvious. You change the blue, and you also change the complementary color, the yellow, in the opposite direction to compensate. So when you change one phosphor, you also change the complementary color. And in the case of the early change in the green phosphor, it didn't matter because there's no common object that's magenta. So if the magentas come out a little more purple or a little more red, nobody would care. But if you move colors near yellow, you change the skin tones, and that just wouldn't fly.
Hey, Wayne, if I understand this correctly, and I very well may not because I'm no engineer, all of these different formulations were just one compromise or another. From the charts that I've seen, no color gamut of any color CRT came anywhere close to covering the full color gamut that the human eye can see. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct, because it's a basic issue of the color of light sources and the mixtures they can give. And it's because of the responses of cells in the eye are not pure, they're very wide band. And therefore, the phosphor that gives a good saturated range of red to orange to yellow to green is going to be a yellowish green and is going to result in cyan colors being less than 100% saturated. So even if you get a laser display that has very wide color range, it's generally going to be missing some of the possibility in the cyan region. This is not a difficulty in terms of practical use, because this characteristic of the eye also means that you can't make paints and inks that are cyan and very saturated. The only way to get those blue-green colors is with a laser or with a very dense piece of stained glass and a bright light behind it.
Camera manufacturers were forever playing a game of catch-up with the tube manufacturers.
Yeah, this situation was like the old joke about the guy in the clock tower setting the clock by when the train arrives, and the train conductor setting his watch about when the bell rings in the clock tower. The camera manufacturer's main aim was to make pictures that looked good on professional monitors. And the secondary aim was to make good pictures on home TVs, because who could tell what the TV manufacturers would do next year?
Are there any more comments?
I have one comment. Maybe Wayne could comment on it, but I heard eons ago that when Sony I don't know what the variation on the phosphors is, that once the manufacturer decided on using a particular one, how much variation there was from, you can tell us whether this sounds plausible, that when Sony was making the Trinitron monitors for Tektronix, who I guess create a batch of phosphor, red, blue, and green, they would check the phosphor color and put it on the shelf when they got one that hit the right color, and they would wait until they had a set of red, blue, green phosphor that was the correct red, blue, and green, because their normal batches weren't that close. Is that plausible?
It's very plausible. In fact, the SMPTE C phosphors, they had several different proposed exact phosphor colors for SMPTE standards, and they eventually settled on SMPTE C. Well, the C stood for Conrac, because Conrac was using custom-made tubes that may have been manufactured by RCA, but were manufactured with a selected set of barrels of phosphor material, and they did not run with the TV regular production. They had those barrels stashed away, and those were used for the Conrac monitors.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. Why don't we move on now to our presentations? And I'm still confused as to who's going first. Are we going to have, because I know that Mike had wanted to start.
Yeah,
what are we going to do?
Blake. Blake's going to go now.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. You're up, Blake.
All right, I'm just getting myself off mute. Good evening, gentlemen. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Blake Hinkle. I'm 28. I live in Ashtabula, Ohio. I started collecting about a little over two years ago in November of 2018. I mentioned that just because I think I've gotten a lot of comments that my collection's pretty vast given the short amount of time that I've kind of specialized. But at any rate, I got with Dave earlier this week, and I did a video, kind of a video essay on the history of Predicta that I found that a lot of people have found to be super informative. And I figured it would be something neat to start the video off with. It's only a little less than 5 minutes long. I did it a little less than a year ago. It's got a lot of stock footage from Philco stuff I found online. And I think from there, that would be a good place to start. And then we could get the full tour.
The history of Predicta. The TV industry was not in good health in 1957. The country was going into a mild recession, and the TV market was saturated. 75% of all households had a television set. Philco was not in good shape when the Predicta came around. RCA was pushing color sets and dominating, while Zenith was pushing the reliability of hand-wired sets. Philco had to do something to carve its difference. As a way to combat the color frenzy, Philco doubled down on design and monochrome technological advances. Philco would do as it had done before and allow its R&D department to show the way for the concepts of the future. The Predicta was a chassis style of console and tabletop sets, occupying minimal space, emulating a theater view, with the picture just seeming to hang on the wall. To give some proper credit, we must mention the team responsible for the design revolution. In 1954, Herbert V. Gosweiler joined Philco as a manager of industrial design for consumer electronics. He had studied at Chicago's School of Art before serving as a captain in World War II. Gosweiler was very excited at the prospect of the Predicta. The product planner Armin Allen can recall him saying, "What do you think? Will it sell?" Allen was so concerned with the radical design, he just said something non-committal and changed the subject. Predicta was announced on June 2nd and 3rd, 1958 at the National Distributors Convention. Design hallmarks included a 21-inch semi-flat picture tube, a separate CRT from chassis, smallest and lightest chassis of the time. It was announced to the public during the 1959 Miss America pageant.
I would like to be one of the first people to present to you your gift from our host, the Philco Corporation. Your television set named in your honor, the Philco Miss America. It's lovely.
The 1958 Miss America pageant has been brought to you by Philco Corporation, creators of Predicta, America's newest and most advanced television. See it at your Philco dealer.
Well, do you have any guesses as to who she might be? Now, I'll give you a big clue. She's lovely. And here's the lovely TV set named in her honor.
Miss America.
At first, Predicta seemed to be a great success for Philco. The stock prices rose strongly. Consumer Bulletin claimed, "It appears to be a useful approach to the long-awaited flat-wall type TV." Philco seemed to pour money into the R&D of these sets, getting the CRT as thin as possible and using a new plastic composite to house the CRT. Philco was also obsessed with saving actual space and weight with the components of the TV, and was pioneering the use of printed circuits in these sets. The radical shrink of main essential hardware contributed greatly to the excessive heat the Predicta were known for. Unfortunately, things soured quickly shortly after this bit of good press for Philco. Consumer Reports criticized the tandem, citing Philco's picture tube, calling it somewhat lacking in crispness or detail, furthermore calling the price much too high, and saying the CRT is still 35 pounds and heavier than most portables. Philco dealers at the time ultimately cited the unreliability as the death of the set. Many were told to keep as many replacement CRTs as possible and stored many extra chassis boards to swap out. The tube reportedly lasted 6 months, and dealers were reported to have made much more in warranty pay from Philco than any sales of the actual sets. After this news spread and the design novelty wore off, the public quickly soured on the Philco Predicta. Unfortunately, the Predicta now resides in the dustbin of history. But let us not forget the interesting things it brought forward, if nothing more than a great case study on applying a standard formula. Form follows function. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Antique Wireless Association in the Old Timers Bulletin, May 1994 edition. Philco 1958, An Era of Unique TV Designs by John Oklowitz, giving me my primary information source.
I started collecting. I went down like a Predicta rabbit hole in that November night in 2018. My grandmother had a Predicta, very particular Predicta set that I remembered very vividly as a child that I have in my collection that I'm not going to spoil by giving away the name. At any rate, it kind of started me down a rabbit hole where I kind of spiraled, and now we're here. At any rate, this is the 1959. My collection is focused on Philco's introductory Predicta line from 1959, introduced during the Miss America pageant of 1959 in November of 1958. This is a 1959 Philco Predicta Baby Grand. It is the only set they sold, only a 24-inch CRT model. This set is fully restored. I came across it on Facebook Marketplace for $100. It's really beat physically. That's why it's got a kind of a stilt job with the books. I got to do some gluing so those legs don't come off. It is fully restored. One of my awesome Predicta friends named Jason Neal in Philadelphia did the restoration for me, and he knocked it out of the park. The front speaker got damaged in transit, unfortunately, before I got it, so I have the sound off, but as you can see, the picture comes on. I'm broadcasting a Channel 5 bubble in my little showcase tonight, so every TV will be on Channel 5. For licensing purposes, I probably won't show any sound just so we don't lose anything with YouTube or anything. But yeah, so this set works great aside from the needing a new speaker. Fully restored, running a 9060 chassis. A lot of these Predicta oddballs, as I call them, ones that aren't the more popular floating CRT head equivalents, they run the 9060 chassis just because of the way that it's spaced out in the back. It's just like a single piece chassis. It's kind of a dog. But at any rate, this is the blonde one, and as you can see, it works great. So I'm going to turn it off. This set probably is familiar to a lot of you. It's one of the more common ones. This is the Philco 17-3. I was specifically looking for this set in this color just because I have a later advertisement you'll see that is in full color, and it showed this one announcing the Predicta line. So it's really pretty. I've got a UHF tuner assembly ready to go for it, but I thought this shaft was shorter than it was, so I got to switch it out. And this is like a mouse maze, so I'm not even messing with that right now. As we move along, I have this is my one of my barber poles. This is my mahogany version. In my mahogany barber pole, I have UHF tuner on it. One of the more common Predictas. You see them on eBay, you see them on Facebook Marketplace. Fortunately for me, this one's not missing any knobs. It's really clean. I got it from a private collector in Cleveland, Ohio. With this set, I also got the one next to it. This one's a little bit more interesting. This is a Philco Predicta tandem stereophonic model. You don't see a lot of these, especially super clean. This came from a collector in Cleveland. He got it from the original owner. It's immaculate. The nice thing about this is that as you can see directly to the left of it, there's a record player. It is also it was sold alongside the Predicta line. It is a G series. What's neat about all their audio stuff and with the Philco Tandem Stereophonic series, it utilizes the audio channels. I'm not super educated on the specifics of like how electronically it's done, but there's like an audio like AV jack on the back that looks pretty universal to all the Philco audio of that area that you can string. And I would imagine that they would use the amplifiers and what have you. And it would give you a pretty rock solid sound. I do not have any of these restored. These ones are in the area of going to be restored, with this one probably next up on the list. And as you can see as well too, I've got a lot of neat Philco period correct clocks, radios that they sold alongside their Predicta line that year. So we're going to go ahead now into the main Predicta room. This is where the goodies are. I'm going to start with the advertisement that I have that will kind of give us a good intro on everything in here. This is a full color dealer advertisement. This was sent internally from Philco to their dealers, announcing the Predicta line in full color. As you can see, like I said, that 17er is also featured. It's got a lot of really neat sets. A couple of them you may not have seen before. And I'm fortunate to have almost all of them in my lineup today. We'll go down and continue. This is a 21-inch Holiday. The Holiday and the barber pole models were announced alongside the 1959 Predictas as their, like, I guess their lead-ins. The reason you don't see the Holiday or the Predicta on this specific advertisement is because it was actually like full page on the other side. I just found the other odd models a little bit more interesting because you never see anything on them. So you can see the tandem's got its own corner there as well. But at any rate, this blonde is super clean. I mean, you never find blondes with that kind of like a finish, no smoky nicotine haze. And the chrome or the brass is all super clean. Right next to it as well, you'll see I've got my mahogany Holiday. This one has a UHF tuner. Again, has the original pieces, relatively clean, especially for what you can find. What's really neat is underneath. So Philco, alongside the Predicta line, had like a deluxe, I guess you'd call it, chassis line. And this is a G series Philco that was one of their deluxe series sold alongside the Predictas in 1959 in blonde. And it's super clean. I got it in Cleveland, Ohio from a gentleman. He got it. It was his father's. So it was from the original owner, I guess you'd say, was his son. And that set is advertised right here. So it's kind of cool. As we make our way over, this little beautiful blonde barber pole is fully restored. However, like any good Predicta, you're going to see that not, even though I have a lot of them functioning, like a Predicta, some of them are still going to lay an egg every once in a while. And this one came back to me immaculate, was working great. And then it started a little bit of a vertical roll. So like anything, you kind of roll with it and it'll get worked on. But we're going to make our way over here to the first little kind of wing, I guess I would say. This is the Predicta full dress wing. The blonde full dress over here is the set that my grandmother had that really got me into collecting, or I guess got me into Predictas. I remember that name and that style. The first Predicta I actually had was a Siesta that I don't even actually have, just because I got really into the 59 line when I did my research and what have you. The full dresses are really hard to find. That's kind of why I started with the 1960 Siesta set, was just because to find one of these sets, you really had to look long and hard. This one I got from a fellow collector, a real good friend of mine named Jerry Traub out of California. He got it restored by a technician of his in San Francisco. I'm going to get in front of the camera now as I'm talking, and I'll start kind of powering these up to show you. These have all kind of been restored by different technicians, but they all work really well. These sets all use the 9L60 chassis, which again is that bear of a chassis that I kind of mentioned. Dan Jones did work a lot of the Predicta Master in Detroit, did a lot of the work on these two sets here. He did it on these two, restored these two for me. They work really well as well. I'm gonna get this powered up. I'll touch another. We don't have it plugged in. Oh, it helped if it was plugged in. Sorry about that, guys. Dan, are you on the call? Do you have anything you want to mention about how awesome the 9L60 was to restore for Predict compared to other normal Predictas? I know a lot of these guys have probably tackled normal Predictas.
Well, I don't know how you'd call it awesome. It has a lot of the same issues that the other styles of Predictas have, but the weird thing about it is it's a very long, like rectangular chassis, and it's kind of three-dimensional. You've got pieces on the top. You got on the left-hand side of the top is your IF strip. The right-hand side is the deflection board. On the back, you've got the 5U4 rectifier. They didn't use the germanium diodes in this one. Power transformers on the opposite end, so at least the 5U4 is not cooking the transformer. You also have a lot of point-to-point wiring on the back, and then on the front, you have the flyback box, and then to the left of that, you've got the video and sound boards and the synchronization.
Dan, your mic went off.
Yeah, it said the host muted me, so I guess I rambled on too long.
No, I don't think so.
At least inside those larger sets, there
was some room to spread things out, so the heating problems weren't quite as bad as inside the actual quote unquote Predictas and like the pedestals and barber poles.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I would only say that the only comment I would have is that the 9L60 chassis is the only chassis that I've personally had the most kind of on-off issues with. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. It's also seemed to be the most hardest survived. Again, my sample pool for that survey is highly limited. So I take that for what it's worth. But I mean, it seemed like these sets, all Predictas in general, ran really hot. And from some of I spoke to a gentleman that had done some research on this stuff. And then I also spoke to the gentleman that I took some of my research off of from an article that talked to a lot of initial Predicta engineers. And heat was the #1 killer of these things. The CRTs actually survived a lot better than most people think. Heat was really the problem. But at any rate, as you can see, these all are working real great. One of the neat features on the bottom is it's got 3-speaker wraparound sound. Philco was really toying around with the different sound ideas in the TV too. A lot of the TVs have different sound gimmicks. On top of so I'll spotlight the middle one. The middle one is a 1959 Philco Predicta slantback or tabletop full dress. I've only ever seen one other. Well, that's actually not true. It's always funny when you look for a set, you never see it for 2 or 3 years, and then you find one, and then a couple come out the woodwork a week later. So there has been a couple that came out the woodwork shortly after I found this one, but you never find these type of oddball Predictas, especially the full dress series. The biggest thing with these sets is that around the back, there's this CRT. There's like a CRT cover that's like this plastic composite. And it's really, really fragile. Most of the time when you find these, they're broken. I'm very fortunate that all of mine in my collection are intact, but I know several collectors that have full dresses that have their CRT covers completely shattered. And then as you can see up here, I was able to score one of the full dress radios that were advertised along the full dress TVs during the 1959 model year. Thank you very much, Dan, for the insight on the chassis.
Yep.
I'm going to go up ahead over here, and I'm going to show you all this is the Philco Predicta brochure that you would get when you come into the dealer to look at one of these TVs. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 of them, and as you saw on the other thing, I've got them nice in museum grade glass. I had this one unfolded to show the full Predicta line. This is from all the research I've done, this is the sets that Philco sold with the actual Predicta badge and the Predicta style chassis. And then as you can see, I've got, this one is what it would look like folded up. It got folded up real neat. And it would fold out to the full page for the barber pole and the tandem. This is for the holiday. And then you can see you've got your baby grand sets here, your slant backs, your Cambridge corner set, and then your full dress sets here. And what's really neat is, I'm sure it won't show on this video, but if you look really close, you can see that there's pen. The dealer wrote the original price on it for him for that one. But yeah. So we'll continue to make our way.
Another neat feature you might want to mention, Blake, is that all the full dress type sets or the more cabineted sets all have the pop-up tuner.
Oh yeah, Dan,
so
that
turns it on and off.
Dan, that's a good note. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, a neat feature that Philco kind of toyed around with on their Predicta line, that all their oddball sets that weren't the exposed CRT or the floating CRT. They had that pop-up tuner where if you look, it pops up. And they kept this for the model year 1960 as well. And you would change your channel by flicking through up there. Whoops, sorry. So yeah, it was definitely something interesting. Just another form factor. I think one of the reasons I really kind of fell in love with Philco's Predicta line and started to try to preserve all that I could from them is that they really were just they were trying so hard to combat against color and just the pricing frenzy from RCA that they were just doing anything in the form factor arena. And you walk in this room and you just take a look, stroll around, and you can just see that it's obvious.
They were trying to stay relevant.
Right. Very true. If you look right here, you can see the next one on the line is going to be the corner, the Philco Predicta corner set, or Cambridge model as they called it. A couple of these sets they sold into the 1960 years. I feel they made probably a ton of them, and that's why you also hear that the 1960 sets were sold into the early 60s to eventual motel chains and what have you. I'm sure they figured some sets were going to sell better than others, which is why some survived more than others as well. But at any rate, this one I personally did my first Predicta restoration on. It's all there, but as Dan can attest, any good Predicta restoration is a good fight afterwards to actually get it working. And I'm still knee deep in that, so I do not currently have a demo for that set. But the next two I do, so we'll continue on. Just to comment too, what's really neat. I mean, they had full wood finish on these sets, real provincial, like regal styling, and it was definitely thinner than RCA's corner cabinet of the same era. It was the thinnest. That was their whole claim to fame. If you look real close in the brochure, they make a point to tell you that it beats everyone else's closeness corner. So the next one we're going to go to is my fully restored Baby Grand set. It's another one the Master Dan Jones tackled for me. I'm going to get this one on.
Every time he says that, I hold my breath when he plugs it in and turns it on.
It seems like most of these sets were also of the hot chassis variety. Like the Siesta is not. The Siesta was easy for me to add like a direct audio and a video input, so I could go directly with a DVD player or a cable set-top box. But a lot of the other, like the Holiday and the pedestals and the 9L60, I think as well, it's a hot chassis, so you couldn't do that without an isolation transformer.
No, it's the 9L60 has a power transformer and record.
Okay, it does. All right, I don't have a 9L60. I've just got the other one.
Yeah, I was going to say the 9L60. That's what was so interesting about it is that in so many different variety of sets, it did have its own transformer as opposed to the Barber Pole and the Holiday, and I think even the Tandem being series string. But this set works great. Again, I was advised, just for the sake of YouTube copyright, I'm not going to demo sound, but this one does work. It's also in very good condition. No books holding up the stilts. I just, again, want to comment on the form factor. I mean, this one's almost Art Deco-y. My shadow's kind of killing the stilts of the legs, but you can see that it's just, the design of it is just, it's striking. All the sets, I would argue, are very striking in their own right.
Hard to come up with replacement speakers too. It's like a 4x10 or so, kind of an oval that's there in that.
Yeah, and we were thankful that the one in that particular set, the front firing speaker was in good shape. However, the side firing speakers, I think mice got in there because the paper cones were completely chewed away, and they even chewed through the voice coil wire. So fortunately, those are, I think they're like 4-inch round speakers. They're very easy to get. So we were fortunate to be able to get replacements from DigiKey and put them in there.
Yeah. Yeah. When I rescued this particular set out of a shed in Southern Illinois from a good friend of mine that I met on the group. This set cleaned up really well. You wouldn't think after when you saw the picture of where I got it from that it would have cleaned up this nice. And again, we got really lucky. Dan was able to find replacement side speakers, and the front one was the only one the mice didn't chew. But there was even a mouse nest in front of the CRT. It was definitely an operation. But we'll. So we'll go to the next one here. This is my Tandem. This is just a standard Tandem. This one is restored. And one thing I do want to highlight that's really neat about this one is I did come across an actual Tandem extension speaker on eBay. And I got it for next to nothing, and it works really good. So I'm going to break my sound rule and just show you guys that I have a working Tandem extension sound speaker with setup. It's pretty neat. Now, this set just got back to me this one was restored by my awesome friend, Larry Whitlock. Larry, just a shameless plug because I love the guy. He's one of the only members I know that sells turnkey Predicta. And that in and of itself is an art and a challenge. So I want to commend Larry for doing that for the community because it's awesome and he's a great guy. But at any rate, I'm going to demo this for you. Hopefully we won't have any eggs.
Blake, we were going to start a pool as to how many of those you could get going before you blew the circuit breaker to that room.
I have my heater plugged in my bedroom, and it's a little like radiator heater, so I don't want to do more than 2 because I know it'll blow because I can't vacuum while it's plugged in.
Our friend Tim Poliniak is known for saying that there are only two types of vintage televisions, those that have failed and those that are currently in the process of failing.
Yeah, and how.
Sort of like all boats are sinking, just at different rates.
Could I ask a question about the plastic on the floating CRTs?
Sure.
I have one pedestal, one siesta, and 3 holidays, and they all basically have that same plastic floating CRT cover, but 3 of mine are fine, and the other 2 give off that awful plastic mold smell and start turning white in once a week. I have to wipe them down, and they all look the same, and they're all in the same room. So I don't understand why 3 are fine and 2 of them are doing this weird thing with the smell and the white crud.
There's speculation on formulations Philco was using. I can only say that as far as my research has shown, Philco kind of at the end there, they were like almost not solvent the last couple of years. They were really running there. So they were running pretty shoestring and using what they had in-house. They spent a lot of money, I think, developing that composite with Eastman. I could be incorrect. I know Dan knows a little bit about that too.
Yeah, the tenite that they used for it, in which oddly enough, they still make tenite today. Eastman is still in business, and they've since made corrections to the chemistry to combat the smell, the butyric acid when the plastic breaks down, and hazing, things like that. So if you could mold new ones today out of tenite, they would last a lot longer. But there's been some speculation that there was a link between the green tint that they mixed in with that, because if you look through a Predicta screen cover by itself, it's green.
Yep.
To counteract the glare of the CRT. Some people have noted that the deeper the green, the more resistant it seems to oxidation. I'm not sure why. I don't know what type of colorant is used. So that's really just a guess.
Is there something you can do to seal them? I thought about taking car wax or something.
Yeah. It retards the oxidation, but it will still happen. But yeah, I find that a headlight restoration kit works very well for cleaning those. And then if you put a car wax on it and buff it off, it'll at least help sort of seal it.
Okay.
So I have something to contribute on this point. Although it would be impractical for something as large as a CRT face, this problem occurs quite frequently with smaller items like knobs.
Right.
Especially the clear plastic objects. Just 1 second.
Exolite screwdrivers were notorious for that too, the old ones.
I know that there's been some talk that like tire sealant as well as
these here
convertible sealant.
So these are those clear plastic knobs. This is actually from a radio. And what I've discovered, these were just white, just absolutely white. And there's all these little nooks and crannies, very hard to clean by hand.
Yep.
The trick is you take these and you put them in an ultrasonic cleaner with nothing more than distilled water and detergent. You don't need any harsh chemicals at all. And you run it for several hours. And you got to be careful if there's writing or whatnot. But if it's just the tenite, it doesn't seem to hurt the plastic in the slightest, and it all comes off, down to bare plastic. It's really quite impressive. But you've got to let it run. Even inside, I don't know if you can see that, but even inside where the shaft went, they come clean. And it's, again, just a strong, detergent and distilled water and an ultrasonic cleaner. So that would be my recommendation if possible. As for keeping them from coming back, your guess is as good as mine. I found that keeping them in a nice, dry, low humidity area seems to help. But
one point, or to your point, I should say, is that on the back side of the Predicta screen cover, it actually has a painted outer bezel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes that kind of turquoise border around, or frame around the actual CRT. So I don't know if that would take that off or not, but I've got some ones that are broken apart here that I could probably use as a guinea pig and try, because I do have an ultrasonic cleaner, so I could cut a chunk.
I think you're muted if you're trying to say something. Adam?
Oh,
No,
he's
no.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could hear him.
My son's name's showing up here because he uses this for school.
Yeah, no, again, just to kind of interject, I've heard that tire sealant and convertible top sealant are also things people are talking about. And I know, Dan, I think you mentioned that there was some type of a composite that might be viable for using to seal it potentially. I don't, without degrading the butyrate.
I haven't had a chance to experiment with any, so
Right on.
It's something I want to do.
I've had some luck with Armor All tire foam. It's pretty interesting stuff. I have no idea where the dirt, corrosion, whatever goes, but if you spray it on and kind of wipe it off a little bit and then come back, it'll look awful for about an hour, and then come back after about an hour, things look a lot better. Take that with a grain of salt, but it might work. We've got a whole bunch of Predictas that sit there and turn white overnight while you're not watching. I don't know.
I'll show you. Tire sealer works.
I'll show you a picture here real quick.
You can see that it's just the design of it is just it's striking. All the sets I would argue are very striking in their own right.
Hard to come up with replacement speakers too. It's like a 4x10 or so, kind of an oval that's there in that.
Yeah, and we were thankful that the one in that particular set, the front firing speaker was in good shape. However, the side firing speakers, I think mice got in there because the paper cones were completely chewed away, and they even chewed through the voice coil wire. So
anyway, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, I'm running too many computers here. I just wanted to show that computer keyboard though. I cleaned those 10-ite keys off with nothing but my fingernail and an edge of a credit card. It took a couple of 6-packs of beer, but they came out, they looked like new afterwards.
I did that technique before I figured out about the ultrasonic.
I have an ultrasonic cleaner, and I got absolutely nowhere with an ultrasonic cleaner. It did nothing.
Did you use detergent?
I did not.
That's the trick. It's an oil-based residue that's on there. I tried them in plain water and also in some ammonia-based clock cleaning material. No difference. It has to be a detergent to emulsify the residue.
Try it again.
All right, guys. I'm gonna show you guys this audio demo, and then we'll get back on the tour here over to the other sets I got left, if that's okay. I've never seen anything like that. So it's kind of neat that audio jack down at the bottom of the CRT base for the tandem puts out that audio that you can kind of use as an extension. I guess back in the day, you would argue if the set was back by your chair and the kids were sitting up close to it, they could listen to it that way too. But again, it's just neat that it works, and there is like a little interesting system in there. I can definitely tell I've been running the sets in here too, because the room is about 15 degrees warmer already. As we make our way over to the other wing in the room, these are going to be the Miss America sets that I have. Now, the one in the middle is the 24-inch Miss America set. That one was their flagship set, the one that they had advertised as the 5-speaker wraparound sound. It has the pop-up tuner, the 9L60 chassis, and then it also does have that 24-inch picture tube that you found the only other set that I know of that was Predicta that was 24 inches, the Baby Grand. To the left and the right of that middle set, you're going to see that's the 21-inch Miss America equivalent, the step down. So it had the 21-inch CRT instead of the 24-inch. It had 3-speaker wraparound sound instead of 5, and it also had the pop-up tuner. Now, none of these sets over here are currently restored. This one's going to be sent to the restoration guru actually a week from Monday. And then the neat thing about these blondes is that one has the UHF and that one doesn't. So I was able to find neat examples of both, especially in blonde. They're very rare. And again, just a comment, you can kind of see throughout the stuff I have in here. I've got little audio accessories, and then this was a AM radio, a clock radio, and then another clock radio. They all sold alongside the 1959 television line. They're all G models. So at any rate, we're going to go downstairs where the tour is going to start to conclude. I got other people's TVs everywhere in my house. It's the problem with collecting, let me tell you. All right. So a neat little piece that I just acquired is a 1958 Motorola early color set, original 21AX, unrestored, but really, really, really clean. I'm starting to dip my toes into the early color pool. So, oh no. We're going to end the Predicta tour on my 1960 Miss America 21-inch set. There's a specific reason why. It's got a really neat feature that Philco was demoing right before they got bought by Ford. I'll show it to y'all. This set is restored and works really well. And again, to comment, I'm using a blonder tongue agile modulator for channel 5 signal with a Roku setup. I have a rabbit ear setup on this TV, but upstairs, as you could see, even farther away from the blonder tongue, you didn't need it. I had that. It's more redundant for looks than anything else. But what's really cool about this TV is that it has Philco's Predicta remote system. This is going to be a direct knockoff on Space Command Zenith technology. And this has a working Director motor, and I do have the remote. So there's a channel change feature. And then this other button is going to give you a mute feature, which is more or less just an audio dampen feature at that time. And then if I hold it down, it'll turn it off. But I've had some luck sometimes where it will turn off and not turn back on. So I'm not going to demo that. But yeah, so that is the 1960 Philco Predicta Miss America 21-inch set. And it's the only 1960 I've kept so far just because it has the Predicta working remote system. I know, kind of cliche, but my ultimate goal with these sets is to hopefully open a Philco Predicta museum/foundation in Palm Springs, California, where I think something like this with this scene would just thrive. And at any rate, I know everybody says they're going to open a museum, but I would only like to argue, I don't know if anybody would think that you would get a Predicta collection like this in 2 years. So don't count me out until you see what I can do. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions. So I hope everyone enjoyed.
I worked for Philco from 1962 to sometime in 1963. And I didn't work in the TV division. I worked in the transistor division where we made germanium transistors, which I didn't realize it, but it was a dying art at the time. And they were labor intensive. But a band who worked with me had worked on a color display system called the Apple tube. It never worked very well, but he said it was rotten to the core. But Philco was attempting to do a color display tube sometime in the 1950s. I left Philco in 63. Ford bought them in 63. I came down to Texas, went to work for TI then with silicon transistors, which have lasted.
Very interesting. I've been very keen to see if what Philco was doing with early color, because at the time it seemed like they were really just doubling down on black and white because they had spent so much money in that direction. They also, just to kind of comment on Philco's financial predicament, I did a little bit of research through some articles online and some of the balance sheets that Philco actually posted at the end of their years and stuff. They really leveraged hard on NASA contracts and everything. And truthfully, from my understanding, the only reason that they were really survived from Ford was because they had a mission control contract. Otherwise, Ford would have probably let them go completely under.
Well, they had a computer division, which may have been part of that. I was there when Ford bought them, and I worked in the Lansdale, Pennsylvania division. And I think they did have someplace else a computer division, which was doing some things that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, they were very big on surface barrier transistor technology, which made for faster computers.
Well, these transistors were just regular diffused germanium, bipolar germanium. They were very good for their time, very labor intensive. Each one had to be hand soldered and hand wired. So it was a dying art.
Wow. But yeah, they were very reliant on defense contracts. You look through their annual reports and half of it is about the stuff they're doing for defense or computer work. And, they finally, I forget the year they shut down the computer division, but they couldn't compete with IBM and they finally gave up.
Right.
I have a question. You guys were talking about getting some information about what the engineers thought at the time. Did they know they were building something that would have such service problems, or were they surprised, or were they waiting for the bad news to come and sending out resumes?
They really were. I think that that was almost set. They were primarily focused on if they were so internally concerned that the design was either going to be a huge acclaim or a big flop, that I think that they didn't even really, they were just, they could say internally that they were putting cutting edge stuff in the TV at the time. Now, cutting edge may have been too cutting edge, which is arguably why you have the heat issues with these sets. But that's what they were just trying to say. Hey, we're putting every last dollar of what we've done with R&D into this TV, and we're designing it to look super striking. And they were betting real heavy on that design language. And again, from what I've read internally, the talk wasn't about reliability. It was, do you think it's going to sell because it looks so different? And that may be a testament to Philco and their mismanagement, that it was more about how it looked and less about how it ran,
They certainly are striking looking, and although the technology in them is somewhat cheap, I guess, you could also look at it as very futuristic. The printed circuit boards, which came to be hated, and the couplets, really proto-ICs, if you will, screen printed circuits, were quite ahead of their time, at least in TVs. So I'd buy that. I think that they were onto something.
They really, like, from what I've read, and I know that as far as the design language and stuff, you could say that some of it was cheap, but they were really banking on it being just this like, it was all of the future. I mean, granted, I think that's all. The cheapness is also a symptom of the fact that they were just over leveraged. If you look in the last 3 years of TVs before Ford bought them, there's so many similarities in knobs and things like that. They were just reusing things from different years for a while.
I think it's a good tribute from David Sarnoff saying that the Predicta made television interesting again, or something to that effect.
Yeah, he is quoted as commenting something to that effect about the Predicta.
Philco, after Ford bought them, had great success, though, with a whole line of cassette audio players, cassette with FM AM tuner. They made a whole line of them that were really very, very nice, and they were very saleable and were good, reliable products.
I know that up until the 90s, a bunch of those Philco engineers were still surviving and held on to a lot of their internal drawings and what have you, because they were very proud of that work. One of the gentlemen that I spoke with was the gentleman that interviewed a lot of those guys for the main piece of information for my video essay. And he has some scans of their original internal drawings of different TVs they had mocked up that they could have launched beside them. And they were really playing with some Jetson stuff, let me tell you.
Well, and Blake, there was a couple that were actually in the catalogs at dealers that they never ended up putting into production. There was a couple that came really close.
Yeah, we still haven't confirmed that one Predicta that looks like it's got a Continental head on top of a wooden metal planer body, like a room divider planer body. We can't confirm that was ever made. There's no documentation. There's no SAMs. There's nothing like that. And from all points show that it was something that they maybe announced but didn't come to fruition, just because of the budget was, especially during the 1960 model year, which is when that was announced internally with the dealers. I think that their budget was just not there. I think that they were just praying they were going to make it the next day, day after day, in that situation.
Also, I think the chassis would never fit in that slim body.
Oops.
So, Blake, are you moving to Palm Springs from Ashtabula?
I would like to, yes. As I've learned in life, even though I'm young, I've learned that you can't really rush anything good. So I want to just make sure I have my ducks in a row all the way through. Palm Springs, fortunately, isn't quite as populated as LA and that greater area. It's on the other side of the mountains, so it's a little bit slower, which I really like as well. But primarily the weather and the mountains, and then just the design aesthetic would be, I think, a big. They have a mid-century modern. It used to be a week, and now it's like 3 weeks in February, where they have people. They have hundreds of thousands of people that come out there now for that. And I think if done properly, that could really be capitalized on, especially out on the West Coast. It's very underserved for stuff like this, I think.
What is your career, your profession?
I'm in home health aid right now. I manage a couple of homes for the state of Ohio of developmentally disabled gentlemen.
Aha.
So I'm fortunate that I think that travels pretty well. The medical field travels pretty well.
Blake, thank you very much. That was very impressive.
Thank you, Steve.
You've done an amazing job in a short period of time of collecting stuff and having a bunch of it restored, which is, as you know, very difficult.
Yeah. Dan nervously laughing.
Yeah, I can see a 9L60 in my sleep. So
Predicta restoration is temporary at best.
Right.
If you can go ahead.
Shall we move on to? I think Mike Molnar wanted to talk about his Admiral color set. Admiral or?
It's a Zenith.
Zenith, right. I knew it was one end of the alphabet or the other.
Right.
So why don't we turn it over to Mike and learn about the Zenith color set.
So last month, I mentioned the Zenith 15-inch set that I often show to people, but it had a color sync problem. So I decided it might be time to dive in to find out what was going on with it. And I figured it's either now or wait for another pandemic. So I decided to go with now. And let's see if I can get the screen reversed here. I was very tempted to say that it's working perfectly now, and it's T-Mobile that's causing what you see on the screen. But the color sync problem isn't fixed, but it's such a neat set that I wanted to do a little starting tour of it. The entire cabinet is built around a metal frame that you can take off in different sections. And then it's a 2 chassis set. There's a vertical chassis with a lot of the IFs and color circuitry, and then a power and horizontal chassis down on the base with a humongous power transformer. And like a lot of things, when I started on it, started finding I had more problems than I thought I was getting into. But this frame makes working on it pretty easy. There's even a place to put some test equipment. It acts as a shelf on the other side there. And one of the first things that I found out was that where I thought most of this was restored, it was only partially restored. Nothing had been done at all on the color circuitry. And I've started putting in some of the replacement parts, but I haven't hit the right thing yet. The diagrams, since this wasn't a production set, I just have little bits and pieces. And I'm hoping that John Folsom can maybe get me some better stuff, because I have to kind of hold these together, and any voltages that were put in there are illegible. There's also no waveforms or anything. But one of the first things I ran into, and it must have been starting to happen while the set was still running, was that the 285 volt supply was down to 220. So I couldn't find a way. I was going to try to relieve some load off of it and see if it came back. But I don't have any diagram that really shows much about what these different pinouts. There's a couple of umbilicals that come up to this chassis, and I couldn't trace it out. So I took the power supply rack out. Now in this early stuff, you can see they're using multiples of a number of tubes to get the amount of current for the low voltage supplies. We still there? They use 3 5U4s. 2 of them are in parallel to do the 285 volt supply, and another one just does a 365 volt supply. So they all checked out okay, but eventually I added a capacitor onto one of the sections in a can, and that brought it right back up to 285, but unfortunately didn't solve my problem. The other thing is, you see they've doubled up on the 6CD6 horizontal output transformers, and they use a voltage multiplier section down there with 2 1B3s and a, I forget which tube is the focus rectifier. So changing some tubes solved some blooming problems I was having. The other thing they did that complicates things is the color is taken off from the second video, and the contrast control is on the first video stage. So as you raise and lower the contrast, the amount of video shifts around. And so there were times I was looking for the signal and finding out I just had the contrast too low. All of a sudden you start to bring it up and things would pop in. But anyway, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to show this and try to report back next month when I've hopefully had some more progress with it. I've got a bunch of capacitors I have to buy and just going to go through and replace a lot of things. The other thing that this neat cabinet did is I found it in a Zenith report. So where you see the bezel for the little 15-inch tube, it was originally intended for their big, I guess 21 or 23-inch tube. But otherwise, it's the same design. It's like the same cabinet all around. So anyway, I'll turn it back to you guys, and hopefully I'll have something more to report next month.
Thanks, Mike. That's really interesting. It's really neat to see that set in operation. Have you looked on our website? We have a document describing the technical design of that set. Do you have that?
I have one thing that says it's the instruction course that they were sending technicians to.
That may be what this is. It's about 10 pages long. Anyway, I'll send you a link to it just in case you.
Yeah, and John said he had some documentation too. I'm going to try him. Certainly, waveforms would be great to have, and something where I could read the voltages and not have to kind of various sheets right next to each other to see where the flow is. But I've got high hopes that maybe next month we'll get this in color again.
Sounds great. All right. I think we'll close the meeting, but I think last time people stayed on and talked for quite a while. I got to get something to eat. I'm starving. So I will leave you all. And the next meeting is February 27th, I believe. And we'll be posting information on it fairly soon, I think. So
Steve, if I could, I just want to mention quickly that if anyone really wants to see the gory details of what it's like to restore a 9L60, I did a YouTube series on Blake's full dress restoration. I think it's 6 or 7 parts to it. But if you go into YouTube and search for Philco Predicta full dress, the videos ought to pop up.
Okay, can you send me a link to it, and I'll post it on our site.
Okay.
And thanks again, everybody, to watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, y'all think I'm not quite as nutty now that you think you probably think I'm more nutty, but whatever.
We never thought you were nutty.
I'm in like-minded company, apparently.
When you're in a house of nuts, everyone seems sane.
Exactly right.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Here.
At last count, it looks like there's over 100 nuts paying attention tonight.
Yeah, and you're the only difference is you're a younger nut.
we grade on the curve.
He's not as salty yet.
Yeah, right. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good to see everybody.
Okay, bye.
Well, thank God there's some younger nuts out there. We need them.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Okay.